afternoon and welcome to today's webinar titled Embracing Change, Listening to the Voice of the Customer in a Post-Pandemic World, brought to you by All Things Innovation and sponsored by Applied Marketing Science. My name is Anastasia Wanu, General Manager of the IMI Division at Informa Connect, and I will be your moderator for today's event. In just a moment, you'll be hearing from the following speakers: Kristen Corrigan, Principal at Applied Marketing Science, and Carmel Dibner, Principal of Applied Marketing Science. Before we begin, let me explain how you can participate in the presentation. First of all, if you have any technical difficulties during today's session, please press the Help button on your player console to receive assistance in solving common issues. We welcome your questions during the webinar. In order to submit questions to our presenters, simply type your question into the question window on the left-hand side of the screen and then hit the Submit button. If at any time you are having audio difficulties, simply hit your F5 to refresh your webcast console. Please also be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be available beginning tomorrow for on-demand view. You'll be notified by email when the recording is available. And now to kick off our presentation, I welcome Kristen and Carmel. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. I'm Carmel Dibner. I'm joined today by Kristen Corrigan. We're with Applied Marketing Science, as Anastasia mentioned, and we're a company that focuses on insights for innovation. We do market research and consulting. And today we're going to take you through our presentation called Embracing Change, Listening to the Voice of the Customer in a Post-Pandemic World. So I'd like to begin with a very quick poll. To what extent do you agree or disagree with the following statement? My customers' needs have changed dramatically as a result of the pandemic. Completely disagree, disagree, neither agree nor disagree, agree or completely agree. Please take a minute to consider your answer and then click Submit. All right, we'll give everyone just a couple more seconds to fill this out. You can see the answers coming in. All right, looks like about 2/3 of you agree and another 7% completely agree. So we're looking at over 70% say that they agree or completely agree that their customer needs have dramatically changed as a result of the pandemic. And that's generally what we've been hearing from our clients. The vast majority say that they do agree that customer needs have really changed as a result of the events of the past year plus. So today we're going to talk about how customer needs are changing and how you need to know your customers in order to be able to innovate in this climate. Voice of the customer research can really help you understand those shifting customer needs, as well as the importance of those needs and how the market and your company is performing on those needs. In order to study the voice of the customer, we rely on advancements in virtual VOC techniques. And we're going to present today some case studies to demonstrate those techniques. So COVID-19 has really created a new reality for consumers. Its disruption of the market has really impacted customer wants and needs, their priorities, as well as attitudes and behaviors. And what we're finding is that a new set of truths is emerging as a result of the pandemic. So I want to ask you, what are the biggest challenges you face in getting fresh insights in today's environment? You should see a pop-up on your screen. Let us know in the chat if you don't. Again, what are the biggest challenges you face getting fresh insights in today's environment? And feel free to submit your answers. We'd love to hear what you're thinking. What we've seen is that the pandemic has changed needs in many, many areas. And we took some time to just brainstorm some of the things that we hear most commonly. So, for example, the pandemic has really changed expectations around customer service, expectations around hygiene and cleanliness, need for e-commerce, and expectations around travel, thoughts around telehealth and how people utilize telehealth, expectations about work-life balance and how people are choosing to use their homes and even their backyards. And not only those practical kinds of needs have changed, but also things related to emotion. So how people feel about working from home versus in an office has changed dramatically over the past year plus, as more and more people are working from home and it's becoming more part of our day-to-day lives. There's also been changes around package delivery time and what people expect around that, ability to return items, around cooking, around our feelings related to personal space, things related to video conferencing and how we use remote technology. And this is just to name a few. There are many, many areas, countless areas, where we see customer needs changing. And we're seeing this in virtually every industry. Additionally, the pandemic has led consumers to reprioritize the importance of their needs. So even in those rare industries where the needs have stayed pretty much identical to what they were pre-pandemic, we're seeing a shift in how consumers and customers are prioritizing the importance of those needs. So you can see, for example, in this illustration, the same needs existed pre-pandemic and post-pandemic or coming out of the pandemic, but need D suddenly has moved to be the most important need. And companies that miss out on these shifts of priority really may miss the mark in terms of their innovations. So the challenge is that brands need to uncover and address these changing customer preferences to innovate successfully, market effectively, and also to stay relevant during this time. The companies that will emerge successful from the pandemic are those that don't rely on outdated research, those that dig deep to understand insights, those who invest in understanding how those needs have shifted priority, and those who are willing to take into account both changes in functional needs as well as emotional needs, stated needs, meaning the needs that people can easily articulate, as well as unstated needs. Those may be a little bit harder for customers and consumers to even put their finger on. But if we do these four things, we don't rely on outdated research, we dig deeper, we invest, and we take into account the full range of needs, we're most likely to be successful in this post-pandemic world. So voice of the customer is an effective technique for understanding these shifts in customer wants and needs. And what is a customer need? A need is a benefit sought by a customer. Needs come about when customers encounter situations or specific occasions. And it's also important to consider the fact that different customers are different, and not everyone is going to feel the same way about needs. Hence the importance of segmenting or looking at different kinds of categories of customers within the market. In the post-pandemic world, those companies that best understand the voice of the customer are those that will be most likely to enjoy the greatest success. In contrast, the companies that rely on the outdated research, that aren't willing to embrace the change, the long-term change that this pandemic will cause, are going to be challenged to innovate successfully and to satisfy customers, even if they'd done a great job satisfying them in the past. I want to take you through some misdefinitions of voice of the customer, because today, voice of the customer often means any kind of customer research. But there's actually a really tried and true definition and a lot of misdefinitions as well. So voice of the customer is not demanded or desired solutions and features. It's not customer-proven technical specifications. It's not the opinions of industry experts or luminaries. And it's certainly not the anecdotes that we hear from sales or tech support. Those can be helpful and they may provide clues into the voice of the customer, but in and of themselves, those anecdotes are not sufficient. And it's certainly not following the competition. That simply leads to a Me Too product that will not differentiate you in the marketplace. We need to find those truly deep, novel insights that are going to impact your business and help you set yourself apart from your competitors. A fundamental principle of voice of the customer is that needs and solutions are fundamentally different. And what we want to do is first focus on customer needs that the customer can provide, and then it's the job of the company to develop the solutions. So let me talk you through different types of needs here. They're functional needs and emotional needs. So a functional need are things like keeping my energy bills down, avoid heating an empty house, knowing how much energy I use, and always getting the temperature just right. But even in a category like heating and cooling, there are also a lot of emotional needs. So for example, feeling in control of your money is an emotional need. Feeling like a smart homeowner, feeling environmentally responsible, and feeling comfortable all year round are the emotional sides of those functional needs. And if we strictly focus on those functional needs, we may lose some of that emotional benefit that we could provide our customers, leading them to even greater customer satisfaction if we are able to acknowledge and address those needs. There are also those stated and unstated needs that I mentioned briefly before. So stated needs are needs that consumers articulate and they can explicitly express. This could be done through interviews, through storytelling, discussions about experiences, and effective probing. Unstated needs are needs that customers can't articulate, but that can be identified through other means or techniques. So sometimes these needs can be found through observation, watching what customers do, looking at how they use our products and services every day. We might be able to discover needs that customers don't even know that they have. And also using projective techniques that involve having the customer step a little bit away from their daily experience and tell us kind of almost from a third-party perspective about how they think about the category. So there's an article that created this entire field, the voice of the customer. It was written by Abby Griffin, who was a doctoral dissertation student of Professor John Hauser, who's actually one of the founders of applied marketing science. They wrote an article in 1993 in the very prominent journal called Marketing Science. And it was the first academic article that really coined the term voice of the customer in an academic sense. And it talks about a very rigorous approach to gathering customer wants and needs. So if everything starts with a good voice of the customer, what makes a good VOC? A VOC involves collecting a complete set of customer wants and needs. And a complete set is usually something around 100 customer needs. So usually it's anywhere between 70 and 130 customer needs in any given category. And what's really important is that those needs should be expressed in the customer's own words. And they should be organized by the customer into groups that go together. So we want to organize the needs the way the customer thinks, not the way your company thinks, to stay closest to the customer. And then lastly, those needs should be prioritized by the customer in terms of how important they are and also current satisfaction with those needs. Virtual techniques have been a very effective way the voice of the customer during these ever-changing times. 3 techniques that my colleague Kristen will discuss in just a moment are machine learning, virtual interviewing and concept testing, and virtual ethnography. And we've been able to use these very successfully during the pandemic with social distancing in mind to really dig deep and get at the voice of the customer. So now I'm going to turn things over to Kristen to talk about some of the benefits of virtual VOC research. Kristen?
Thanks so much, Carmel. So yeah, I'd like to dive in to talk about some of the benefits of virtual VOC research and then go a little bit more deeply into those methodologies that Carmel just spoke about. So first and foremost, I think 2020 has showed us as consultants and researchers that almost all research can be done virtually, right? So qualitative interviews, I know a lot of us were doing these in person and virtually before pandemic, but we've really been forced to shift to 100% virtual, and it's gone quite well. We've even been able to do virtual interviews that incorporate a prototype test where we've actually had to mail materials to customers and successfully done that. So it's been great. Of course, quantitative surveys, it's been the case for a while now. Those have been primarily done online, but we've seen an increase in those. And the last piece is mobile ethnography. You may think that observation isn't possible during this time where we have to be distant from one another, but mobile ethnographic tools make it possible for us to stay close to our customers. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the slides to come. The second piece is that customers generally, consumers generally, are more comfortable with virtual methods. We've seen across the board just improvements in virtual technology in general. I think companies have been forced to do this with work from home and schooling from home. Even this platform we're all on together today, the technology's there. People are generally more comfortable being on video, and some people have more flexible schedules, right? Because they're not commuting, or their job function has changed so that they have a little bit more give in their schedule where they're able to complete a qualitative interview or do a quantitative survey. Generally, virtual research is just faster and more economical than your traditional methods. It doesn't require travel. You're not dealing with as many third parties to coordinate groups, focus groups and visits and dealing with those logistics. So it allows us to be quick and agile. And then the last piece is we've seen customers across the board really want to tell you they're changing opinions. They're eager to share. They're talking more than ever. We know, as Carmel talked about at the beginning of the webinar, that routines are changing, new opinions are emerging, and customers are turning online to social media, to reviews, to various forums to share those thoughts. So there's really a wealth of information out there and information we can get virtually. The first method I want to talk about is an emerging method, and that's machine learning. I know this terminology has really been abuzz for the last several years in our field of innovation, but we've utilized machine learning algorithms for qualitative research. And when I say machine learning and refer to it through the next couple of slides, think of it as a sophisticated data reduction tool. So it essentially allows us to take a massive volume of text, think millions of lines of text, and to distill it into a manageable amount of qualitative data so that we can formulate insights. It's a great choice for projects where we may have limited budgets, which I know is the case a lot lately, quick turnarounds, and of course now when getting in person is just difficult or nearly impossible. And we can get these rich, qualitative, deep, nuanced insights from existing data. So this could be data that customers are leaving on social media. It could be commentary that they're leaving in product reviews. It could be data from comments on YouTube. It could be data from forums. There's really a lot of different sources that we can tap into for a method like this. One of the big benefits that's relevant to all of us now as innovators is that machine learning methodology is a good fit for our current reality. So I mentioned that customers' opinions, needs, thoughts are changing. They are online more than ever, and they're just creating an unbelievable amount of content for us to tap into. We know that the world is changing constantly, and a method like this allows us to identify new and emerging needs early and quickly, and to really stay on the pulse of what customers are talking about. Machine learning, of course, doesn't compromise the social distancing that many of us are trying to do. The data collection is all remote, so we don't need to worry about that. And lastly, it's easy to compare pre and post-pandemic insights because we're able to timestamp our data. I've had a lot of requests from clients lately wondering what the staying power is of some of the needs that have emerged during COVID. And how trends or opinions will change. And a method like this allows us to track that because we can look at needs and sentiment of needs and type of needs in a given time period, and then again in another time period, and easily compare. So lots of benefits there. I mentioned customers are talking. I have a couple of stats here to share with you. These are pre-pandemic numbers. Next, I'll go over some of our current numbers. But 3 billion active social media users. I mean, that's not surprising. I feel like more and more people are joining these platforms. The average person spends 2 hours or more per day on social media, a lot of time there, over 100,000 online forums. And believe me, these forums are available on a variety of different topics. So obviously some of the consumer topics you would expect, but we've also found very insightful forums where people are talking about B2B or technical categories or patient forums as well. 60 million have posted reviews online about products and services. So a lot of information to tap into there. 265 billion customer service calls every year. Those customer service calls, while they're often audio, can be transcribed and really mined for rich insights as well. And then the average person has 11 customer service interactions per year. So there's a lot of information to collect. And when we look at user-generated content now, it really has grown significantly during the pandemic. So let's run through a few numbers here. We found that 75% of people, this is globally, say that they're spending more time on their phones during the pandemic. This isn't surprising. For a while, many were stuck at home, and so they're scrolling their phones and they're contributing content. When we think about lockdowns globally, we found that 47% of people spend more time on social media. So those numbers I showed before are definitely growing. Again, when we look globally, 15% of people are planning on continuing to spend more time or longer on social media. So these trends are happening during the lockdown periods, but then they're continuing. 23% of people are currently spending more time with social media, and that's independent of those stay-at-home orders, which shows us the staying power of these activities. We also found that adults in the US are spending the equivalent of 16 hours a day on digital media. And that's up from 12 and a half hours a day pre-pandemic. So this includes time spent on multiple screens. It's just more time digitally across the board. And lastly, daily average media consumption is expected to remain at a little over 13 hours a day, which is an 8% increase over pre-pandemic averages. So what's all this telling us? There's a lot of activity of our customers online and a lot of potential to mine those insights that already exist. Let's talk a bit about how our machine learning methodology works. Like I mentioned before, it definitely makes it possible to more quickly find insights that matter. It's faster than traditional methods. As I mentioned before, it's a data reduction tool, so you have the processing power of a machine. It's less that human analysts have to read through. It overcomes human bias. So what we have in the algorithm is a machine that's looking for unique voice of customer needs in a large set of data, millions of lines. The machine's job is to find all of the unique needs within that data. It doesn't bring any bias to the process like human interviewers or analysts otherwise would. It's cheaper. User-generated content exists. It's virtually free. We don't have to schedule and incent respondents to participate in one-on-one interviews or focus groups. It's complete in that it draws on comments from thousands and thousands. In some ways, it's easier than traditional methods because the machine does the heavy lifting. Again, it's reducing the data, and it's allowing human analysts to spend the time on the back end to synthesize the output and create the research story and implications. And lastly, it's relevant. So we're getting insights at the moment of truth. We're getting insights from customers when they're experiencing that moment with your product or your brand or your service. And so it's independent of a research interview, and you're really getting that rich insight, that rich sentiment from that moment. Let's talk a bit about the machine learning roadmap. So what do you need to do to make this work? The first step that you always want to go through is to identify those sources where your customers are talking, and then mining and extracting that content off of those sources so the machine can read it. We train the algorithm to understand what is an informative insight and what is not, and which in this case, we're training it to understand what is a need and what is not a need. We run the machine outputs the several thousand phrases that are representative of the larger data set, and then we do our research analysis from that set, really looking at the research story and driving qualitative implications. So let's look at a quick case study here with machine learning. In this case, our client was PVH, and PVH owns a lot of popular clothing brands like Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, Warner's, Olga. And this research was done in 2020, and they were looking to uncover insights related to bras and bra purchasing. And since so much shopping has moved online, they wanted to understand the changes of customer needs related to online shopping for bras specifically. So what did we do? For this engagement, we utilized machine learning for VOC. We compiled a data set of over 20,000 relevant sentences. These came from online forums, review sites, and retail site reviews. We trained the machine to identify the informative content, and within seconds, the machine identified about 2,000 sentences, which were most representative of the entire data set. We unearthed 135 unique customer needs related to purchasing bras. And these needs spanned the entire purchase experience. They spanned 7 categories, including packaging, arrival, quality and durability, comfort and wear, the in-person and online shopping experience, post-shopping, style, look, fit, measure, sizing. So it really was all-encompassing. The team was also able to analyze comments about specific brands, isolate strengths and weaknesses, so really powerful. 2 of the significant findings that came from this study. First, we discovered the importance of and appeal of including extras like a wash bag with the bra. So this is something that competitors were doing, but our client was not, and that really came through in the research. The second finding was more nuanced. We learned in regards to color, only the darker tone bras were named after food and the lighter tones were not. And this was perceived as offensive. Customers felt that either all colors should be named after food or none, and that things should be consistent. So this was a nuanced insight that really informed our client strategy. The next methodology, virtual methodology for VOC I want to cover today is virtual in-depth interviews. And I'm sure a lot of you on the line today have experience conducting in-depth interviews. They're really great for investigating the why and the how, as opposed to looking to count how many. In these in-depth interviews, our goal is to have guided and detailed conversations around a given set of topics to allow us to hear customers' thoughts and experiences in their own words. One of the most important things to keep in mind when doing one-on-one interviews, either in person or virtually, is this idea of probing to understand why. So when a respondent speaks in a generality, if they say your product is good or it could use some work, really digging deeper to get beyond the obvious to understand the needs that underlie what they're saying. So of course, these in-depth interviews can be done in person, but we've had a lot of success doing these over video chat with platforms like Zoom or Teams, as well as just telephone. And it's been helpful. As I said, customers have been able to fit these interviews more easily into their schedules. And it really does help us to reach more customers in a shorter period of time. So let's talk about a case study that's related to virtual in-depth interviews. We worked in 2020 with a major manufacturer of medical devices. And in this instance, they were looking to do some prototype testing on a new disposable product for one of their most widely used devices in their product portfolio. And in this case, they had a prototype that they had developed. They actually had a couple prototypes that they wanted to test with customers in order to inform the last stages of product development, as well as marketing and positioning of this new product. So some of the key questions they came to us with, VOC questions. What are the customer opinions on the proposed prototypes? What do they like? What do they dislike? What are the key benefits? And what questions or concerns or clarifications do they have about the prototypes? Another question they had, do the proposed enhancements appeal to customers? Why or why not? They also wanted to know how these prototypes performed during preliminary usage tests. What worked well? What issues came up? They wanted to also understand differences that emerged by segments. So in this case, we were talking about these disposables with both patients and professionals, and really to understand what implications these things had on their marketing and development. So to accomplish this, we conducted 20 in-depth interviews via web conference. We mailed various prototypes to respondents and used these prototypes during our discussion. And we asked respondents to complete certain tasks with the prototypes and talk us through it while they were doing those tasks. And through the research, we were able to recommend the prototype that our client should proceed with, several important changes to implement before development started or ramped up. And we also had some specific feedback about marketing and communications to make sure that the products were seen as advantageous and believable to all of their target markets. So this was really successful. We were very pleased with the fact that we were able to pull this off virtually. I will say that this particular engagement was happening right on the cusp of COVID. So we had all of these originally booked to be done in person and then had to shift online. And it was so successful that our clients planning to do research of this type virtually, even in the future, it really worked well. The last method that I want to talk to in terms of VOC in our current reality is ethnography. And ethnography, sometimes it's called observational research. It's a great way to understand your customers' latent, unspoken, or infrequently mentioned needs. So mobile ethnography involves respondents collecting ethnographic information on their own through the use of mobile technology, which is typically their cell phone, and using an app on their cell phone. It allows us to watch participants use products without us actually being there. The mobile ethnography exercise itself is a combination of independent capture, where we'll ask respondents to capture things as they happen throughout their day, as well as some instructed activities or homework assignments where we'll have respondents do specific things and reflect on those things in the ethnographies. I think in terms of the research methodologies that we partner with clients on at AMS, ethnography is a piece where I think most are thinking it's not possible during COVID, but with these methods, it is possible, and we've gotten a lot of rich customer information from those sessions. I want to talk a little bit about how ethnographic research is a great complement to traditional voice of customer interviews and voice of customer research. So when you're doing an in-depth interview to inform innovation or product development, you may hear things about, if you're thinking about the time it takes someone to accomplish something, for example, you'll get a rough sense of what takes more time and what takes less time. If we're doing observation, we can measure time on task through time slicing and really get a more precise read on that. In-depth interviews, virtual or in person, typically get at top of mind needs, right? During the conversation, the customer will relay what's top of mind, which can be great. But observation can really add that ability to get at those unspoken needs that customers may not even know that they have. In-depth interviews can give us clues about how typical operations or processes work. With observation, you can record the actual sequence of operation and really understand those exceptions and workarounds, which is great. In-depth interviews will often tell you descriptives. So in this example, we're saying in the description of a physical environment, it was dirty, it was loud, it was dark. The observational piece lets us have a vivid exposure to the customer's environment. And this is a great way to bring life to our voice of customer results. And I've found a really great way to get buy-in on these innovation research results internally. When we have video clips to share, when we have real photos to share, it makes the insights that much more relatable and believable. You may have heard of a phenomenon called the Hawthorne effect. And this dates back actually to some research that was done on manufacturing workers who worked on electrical relays at Hawthorne Works. And this was a Western electric plant in Illinois. And in this research study, they were measuring the impact of lighting changes on employee productivity. And what did they find? They found that when lighting went up or was increased, that productivity increased. They found that when lighting was decreased, the productivity increased. And they found that when the lighting stayed the same, that productivity increased. So what did they conclude from this? They concluded that the productivity change was due to the mere fact that the workers were being observed, right? So we call this the Hawthorne effect. That idea that customer behavior or worker behavior in this case may change because we're watching. And mobile ethnography does help us to combat this. You're never going to completely avoid the Hawthorne effect, right? But mobile ethnography helps because you don't have that researcher physically present in the customer's environment. They're with their phones, which they're typically with anyway, so it does avoid that phenomenon just a little bit. I have another case study that I'd like to review with you where we did virtual ethnography. And this study was done on behalf of the New England Dairy Association. They are an organization out of New England that advocates for dairy farmers and also advocates for the health benefits of dairy and dairy milk specifically. So for this, they were really looking to explore the needs and trends of dairy consumption during COVID with three key segments of interest. And those segments were teens, pediatricians, and school nutrition directors. And they specifically were looking to understand what was driving the increase in milk consumption over COVID, because that's something they were noticing. And would this be something that would hold post-pandemic? The methodology we used for this study was, of course, virtual. We had 3 online discussion boards, 1 for each segment of interest. Each lasted for about 3 days. Each had about 6 to 7 respondents. And the boards consisted of questions that respondents answered on a daily basis. And they also had exercises, ethnographic exercises that they had to do each day, taking pictures, videos, accomplishing certain tasks. So it allowed us really to understand these segments in much more detail than we could with a traditional focus group or one-on-one discussion. What did we find? In the teen market, we learned that most teens, they enjoy dairy, but they don't particularly enjoy drinking plain dairy milk unless it's flavored or served with a sweet like cookies or served in their cereal. We learned that many of the teens, in fact, confirmed that they were drinking more milk since COVID and just having more dairy in general. And this was mainly due to the fact that they're home with hybrid learning models and snacking a bit more. We learned that teens were spending more time on social media, but on that social media, they weren't seeing much about dairy. We also learned, interestingly, that one of the key product features that teens were talking about was milk packaging. So they were interested in innovation here. They were interested specifically in portability, fashionability, and freshness. They showed us pictures and examples as part of their ethnography to exemplify how they would like to see their milk packaged. So that was really cool. For the pediatricians, we gained a deeper understanding of how they're providing nutritional guidance to their patients. Interestingly, we found that most doctors were not recommending plant-based milks unless somebody had an allergy. And we did learn that a few of the pediatric patients that doctors were seeing were experiencing a bit of weight gain during pandemic. And rather than cut out things like dairy, pediatricians were recommending that children increase their activity first. And lastly, for school nutrition directors, we learned that dairy is still a vital part of these school nutrition programs, but there have been a lot of challenges due to COVID because a lot of times the lunches are being sent home. So again, with the packaging concerns that the teens had and the freshness concerns, those were the things that school directors were talking about in terms of, the innovations that they had hoped for their milk. So all of these rich insights informed our clients' communication strategy and how they partner with dairy farmers and milk providers. We were able to give them these insights in a short period of time and really inform why they were seeing the trends that they were in terms of milk consumption. Before we get to the Q&A, I just want to wrap up the ethnography section by talking about some of my favorite examples of new products that came from observational research. So the first here, the observational insight, is the distance from the pantry to the fridge is the farthest in the supply chain. And the big product innovation here, this was several years ago now, is the Coca-Cola fridge pack. And I'm sure many of you recognize this packaging either from soda or seltzer water, any type of cans that you keep at home. This was born of observational research. It was actually research that was sponsored by Alcoa, who wanted to drive demand for beverages sold in aluminum cans in general. And what they observed was that the cans of soda were consumed significantly more quickly when they were placed in the fridge when someone finished their grocery shopping. Alternatively, people were placing them in the garage or the basement, and they just weren't drinking them as much because they weren't readily available. So they noticed this through observational research. They created this packaging, which makes it very easy to place in your fridge. And, one of my favorite quotes from this, one of the Coca-Cola bottling executives said that this was the biggest innovation in packaging that they had seen since the creation of that iconic Coke bottle that we all know. So really a big one that came from ethnography. This next one is P&G Swiffer, which I think we're all pretty familiar with. The observational insight was that using a vacuum cleaner for small jobs is just a pain. And I think we can all attest to this, right? You have how heavy the vacuum cleaner is. A lot of times there's a cord that gets tangled up, so it's difficult to get it out and then roll it back up to put it away. They found through observational research that the vacuums were very loud, and oftentimes cleaning was being done by housewives when children were napping and they didn't want the loud vacuum going. So out of all of these observational insights, the P&G Swiffer was created. Initial iterations of this were the P&G Swiffer Wet Jet. Again, solving that observational need that it's a pain to get the vacuum out, the broom just doesn't cut it. Also don't want to take the mop out. We have the Swiffer. And the last example here is the LK Easy H2O bottle filler. And this came from research on a very old category. Water fountains have been around for quite some time now, but it came from noticing that it's really hard to fill a water bottle at a water fountain. So if we think about gyms and we think about airports, the observational research showed that people are carrying their own water bottles more and more. They want the ability to fill them so that they can have water with them at all times. They also don't want to necessarily use a water fountain because they're a little awkward and they're kind of unsanitary sometimes. You know, people might put their mouth on them. People can shy away from them for that reason. So through their observational insights, they created these fountains, which I'm sure we've all seen, where it's touchless, and you can use your own water bottle and fill up that way. Very easy. And it also has the added benefit of digitally counting how many water bottles are saved as the result of you filling your own water bottle. So it ticked off some needs that people had in terms of wanting to be environmentally friendly and why they were carrying their own water bottles in the first place. So some really cool innovations there that came from VOC ethnography. Just to summarize and wrap up before our Q&A, I think we can all agree as innovators that it's vitally important to keep a pulse on changing customer needs. I think we can all agree that that's important during normal times. I think it's even more important to get an understanding of that given how things are changing and progressing constantly. In terms of methodologies of how to do that, machine learning, remote in-depth interviews, virtual ethnographic techniques, they allow us to conduct this innovation research virtually, quickly, and cost effectively. And I'll say I do expect some in-person methodologies to return as we get to our post-pandemic lives. But I do believe that much of what we've gained from virtual methods will stay, which means easier access to changing customer insights more quickly and more economically. Just benefits for VOC research in general, which is absolutely phenomenal. So with that, I will turn it over to see what questions we have.
Thank you for a great presentation. As a reminder, you can participate in today's session by asking questions via the Q&A window on the left-hand side of your screen, and then hit the submit button. The first question is, any success stories with machine learning on B2B capital equipment?
Sure. Carmel, do you want to talk about the snowplow example?
Yes, absolutely. So I saw this question come in, and yes, we do have lots of success stories with B2B as well. So one of our clients, and I'm actually able to speak freely about this example because our client has presented with us on the topic, was a manufacturer of snowplows. And what they noticed was that snowplow manufacturers were going online. They'd come home from plowing in the middle of the night. They'd go online to these forums and they would talk to each other about best practices for snowplowing, issues they were encountering, etc. Now, our client had been a veteran of the snowplow industry for a very long time. So you'd think he'd know pretty much everything there is to know about snowplows. Well, machine learning led to some really interesting insights for him. And one of the most interesting insights was an insight around the headlights and how they can block the plow. So oftentimes, as we said, snowplowing is done in the middle of the night where there isn't great lighting. And the snowplow drivers rely on the headlights to really be able to see the edge between let's say, the driveway, and so where the grass is, versus the concrete or the driveway itself. And what they found was that exactly at the precise moment when they had to angle the snowplow to make those kind of very delicate turns, the plow, the shovel part, would block the headlights. So exactly when they needed the best visibility, they actually had the worst visibility. And we were able to uncover this through machine learning, something that our client had never heard before. So certainly we have had many successful applications of machine learning in B2B cases as well.
Great
question. Thanks for asking that.
Great. And I'll go to the next question now. We love the idea of virtual ethnographies. Do you find that respondents can easily use mobile ethnography technology?
Yeah, I can take this one, Carmel, if you want. That's another good question, and it's one that comes up often. The platforms that we're using for virtual ethnography are often almost exclusively apps that people download to their smartphones, which, given the increase, especially during pandemic, of phone usage, people are very comfortable with apps on their phones. And they're designed in a way that are very intuitive, just a few clicks to get to text boxes, easy to pull up the camera or the video or turn into self mode. So we really haven't encountered any issues with a variety of audiences being able to use the mobile technology. And almost universally, we get the feedback after these sessions that people want to be involved again the next time we need help, and that they find it very fun and find it rewarding too.
Great, thank you. And I'll go on to the next question. We've heard a lot of people have Zoom fatigue during the pandemic. Do you find that respondents are reluctant to complete digital ethnographies because they feel they already have too much screen time during the day?
Yeah, I can take this one. So typically, no. People think of Zoom fatigue typically sitting in meetings for long hours or not being able to move around. I think as long as you design those kinds of digital ethnographies to be really engaging and interactive, it's kind of thought of as a different sort of activity than the typical Zoom activity where you're sitting still. But it is a good point that you do need to put some thought into how can you make those kind of digital ethnographies most engaging for those who will be participating, so it becomes something that they really want to do. But we found that if you carefully design the exercise with a participant experience in mind, we haven't really seen Zoom fatigue with digital ethnographies.
That's a great response. And I'll take the next question now. I think it's great to see you were able to complete virtual interviews and have prototypes in respondents' hands. Our organization would love to do something like this, but are afraid the logistical hurdle will be too overwhelming. How did you manage logistical challenges?
I love this question because there were a lot of logistical challenges in the case study that I presented on the medical device disposables engagement. So it's a really good question. And I'll say simply that it does take a lot of planning, and more planning than you think. It requires to have very straightforward instructions mailed to respondents. It requires labeling prototypes very carefully. It also requires doing extensive tech checks and test runs before the research starts, right? Because the last thing we want to do is get the clients on the line and get us on the line and the respondent on the line, and then the camera doesn't work or they don't have the prototypes around. And so it really, a lot of it does depend on the markets that you're looking at, the customers, and the type of product that you're shipping around. But it does take a bit of planning to pull it off successfully and seamlessly, for sure.
Great. And we just have a new question that just came in. Which technology do you recommend for machine learning?
Great question. So there are lots of different technologies out there. We use an algorithm that was developed at MIT by some researchers at MIT that we found to be highly effective, but certainly there are many, many algorithms that you could use. We particularly like this algorithm because it's really, as Kristen said, a sophisticated data reduction tool that relies on the semantic meaning of the content that's being submitted. So, when we say sophisticated, it's because it's looking not just at the specific words used, but it's able to look at combinations of words and themes and help us to extract some of those more needle in a haystack customer needs that may not be frequently mentioned. But we know that frequency of mention is not always correlated. Frequently, it isn't correlated with the importance of a need. It's just correlated with how top of mind a need is. So an algorithm like that one that can effectively find those needle in a haystack needs that might be really impactful if you were able to address them are typically the algorithms that work the best and will yield the best insights that will allow you to find those differentiators.
And it looks like we have time for just one final question. Which types of research questions are most conducive to machine learning? Conducive.
Sure.
And are there certain research questions that are not conducive to machine learning?
Yeah, I can take this one, Carmel, and then feel free to chime in since it's the last question. We've had a lot of success conducting machine learning qualitative engagements to inform product development and innovation. In other words, collect voice of customer and a very robust and nuanced voice of customer. We often have specific asks to use the algorithm to help identify adjacencies, also to look at which claims, advertising claims, may be most powerful or most resonant with audiences, as well as what trends exist as they relate to customer needs and sentiments right now and over time. In terms of what machine learning isn't best suited for, I always like to caution that when we talk about machine learning, we're talking about a sophisticated data reduction tool for qualitative insights. So while we can count how many times something is mentioned, it's not a quantitative exercise. So we're not looking to create word clouds or to count frequency of mention to understand that. Rather, we're looking to get in-depth qualitative insights to inform innovation. And I will say that the first step of any engagement that we have involves some sort of consultation and assessment. And with machine learning, it's assessment of sources. So we always look to see what sources exist, where customers are talking, and if we can get that information that we're seeking within those sources before we commit.
Thank you. That was very informative. It looks like we're all out of time now, and I'd like to thank our wonderful speakers, Kristen and Carmel, in Applied Marketing Science, and everyone who's joined us for the call today. We will be sending you a link to the recording soon. Thank you, and have a great day.